Being a cab driver in New York City, or in any other large city, I would guess, you can come to feel unappreciated, invisible. Many people in New York during the 1980s, when I was cab driving there, treated me like a servant. They were used to having servants, some of these people, and used to their servants being invisible, not presences, just there to help them, extensions of their world. And the more unobtrusive a servant was, the better this person was, according to such people. They didn't want to know servants' names. They didn't want to know about their home lives or think of them as people. They didn't care about my home life. One time I had these wealthy women who were shopping. We were going down Fifth Avenue, and they had a child with them, a little girl of maybe 5. Now, people who are used to having servants didn't think of their servants as hearing what they said. They would whisper to each other, but they wouldn't whisper carefully. And this one woman whispered to the other one, apropos of the little girl, obviously, "Oh, just let her go right here." And I heard it quite clearly. It was meant to be something I should not hear and should not figure in any live way, but I heard it clearly. And I entered into the discussion. I said, "No, don't let her go right here." And the two women sat back as if slapped. Here I jumped out of my assigned role. I was not the well-mannered servant giving Madame her soup without comment and doing it correctly and unobtrusively and fading back into the shadows of their lives. I was interrupting them. What's more, I was interrupting them by showing them what awful people they were at that moment. Let her go right here, pee all over the back footwell of my car, and leave it to someone else to have to smell and clean up later. So I drove them on to a store where they could go in and struggle like anyone else to find a bathroom for the little girl to go in. Well, that was one attitude you would encounter cab driving. Another one was people would be in a great hurry and they wouldn't realize that I, as the driver, might be doing an excellent job of getting them where they were trying to get to, fast and efficiently. One time I had a young couple going out to LaGuardia Airport at a bad time of day, again around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, always the worst time to be driving anywhere in New York. And they had to be there sooner rather than later because they'd left home late. It was their own fault that they were late, not my fault. It was the guy mostly who was a jerk about all this. The woman was quiet. But along the way, the guy had made clear at the beginning that it was my function to get them there in record time to LaGuardia because they were about to miss this flight they had started out late for. Now, I knew it wasn't my function to get them there on time for their flight. It was theirs. They had planned badly or hadn't planned, and they were leaving it to me to take up the slack in their own messy lives. But as a kind of puzzle, I did the best I could, and in fact, I got them there in amazingly efficient time and without shredding my own nerves as I went. I didn't stamp on the gas and stamp on the brake. I hung a little behind the herd when it was just as efficient to do that. I played the synchronicity of the lights when it was to our advantage to do it, and when it wasn't, I would go across town and angle over toward the FDR so that I could get them uptown to the Triborough and across and to LaGuardia in good shape. And I did. But I wasn't pushing in an obvious way. This guy clearly was one of the types who wanted me to be honking wanted me to be intimidating cars ahead of us by bad behavior. None of that would have helped. I chose the quieter approach, the more subtle approach. The woman might or might not have observed any of this. But I got them there faster than I would have guessed I might. We pulled up to the main terminal there. They were flying American. I got them to the American terminal. The guy paid me, and he didn't give me a tip. Well, that made me curious. I wasn't so surprised. It sort of lined up with his character and his lead up. He was mad at me because he was late. He wanted me to get them there earlier than humanly possible so that he could catch the flight. And when I didn't work an obvious miracle, obvious to him, he was going to take it out on me by not giving me a tip. I think that was the logic at work in his small mind. So I asked him, as if it didn't irritate me that he wasn't giving me a tip, because it always did. If I felt I had done the job and done it very efficiently and should expect one. I hadn't been impolite to him. I hadn't pointed out what a jerk he was and how the logic of his mind was very warped and small. I hadn't pointed out his dandruff or his bad breath or any of these other factors I might have noticed about him. I was polite. I was fairly unobtrusive in terms of what I might have said. But I asked him, well, that's interesting. Why are you not giving me a tip? Here, I got you here in record time. He said, you did not. You weren't even trying. I told you we were in a hurry, and here the woman said, come on, Joey, we got to get this flight. He's wasting more time by getting all huffy with me. Joey. I said, 9 out of 10 other cabs would have taken 30% longer to get here under these circumstances. I guarantee it. I gave you a particularly good ride. Did you see that move I pulled back at 37th Street? 37th Street, he said himself. He hadn't been paying attention. The guys at the garage would have been awestruck at how I had aced the traffic, aced the lights, and made it to the bridge and across, and how I had woven from lane to lane as if anticipating when a break was going to open up in the traffic. He hadn't observed any of this. It was a frenetic time of day. He was a frenetic guy. He liked to be angry. There are some New Yorkers who are that way. They glory in their own anger. That's one thing about New York that can be unpleasant. So he gave me $1 on top of $16 or something, a very chintzy tip. Went away, still huffy. Joey. Or sometimes there were nice individuals. New York had all types. Later in the evening, more generous impulses tended to come out on the part of various customers. And maybe on my part too. How could I tell? People had often had a few drinks. They were about to go to bed. They weren't fresh from work. They'd had little time maybe to eat, to socialize some. Darkness can be soothing insofar as it ever got dark in New York City. There was less traffic then, but there was always traffic. I remember one time I picked up a young couple late at night down, I think, in the meat packing district. They were going to an address just off Amsterdam, way up in 105, 110 in that neighborhood. So it was a long ride, a ride I had to figure out in my mind with some diagonal working at first, and then I would get on to 10th Avenue, which would become Amsterdam. It would have synchronized lights, and at that point I could move uptown fairly rapidly. But first I had to do some cutting across, and I worked it like a miracle that time. It was a quiet evening. The city was relatively quiet. This couple in back was quiet. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were feeling amorous. Maybe they just had spoken about important things and didn't feel like speaking about them anymore in my presence. But they didn't harry me. The guy told me their address and let it go at that. And they sat back. Maybe they were asleep back there. I couldn't be sure. But I drove, and the city was friendly to me. The gods of the traffic lights were friendly. They smiled on me. And the potholes were friendly. There were times when I could tell which potholes were coming when, I could see them and avoid them skillfully by steering. And there were other times, blessed times, when I knew where the potholes were without even looking. They seemed to communicate with me. The car and I, as one, could swing up, down, this way and that, hitting nary a pothole, nary a heavy bump the whole route. This happened from time to time. It was a wonder, but it did happen. And it happened that night, that quiet night, working our way uptown. I don't think I made more than one stop the whole time, and maybe that was a slowly rolling stop, and we were on our way again without a jarring halt at all. I wondered at one point if the people in back even noticed what was happening, but I didn't really care. It was good for me to have that kind of experience now and then, whether or not it was shared with anyone. I could tell other drivers about it later, and they would understand. We would compare streets where it was best to cross at certain times of the day, certain traffic conditions. So northward we drove. We didn't hit bad bumps. We didn't hear bad noises. We didn't get red lights we had to stop for. I didn't go through any red lights, didn't break any laws. I was just swinging in perfect harmony with the universe of New York. I pulled them up next to their awning on 108th Street or whichever cross street it was. The man paid me. He gave a generous tip. And then he said very softly, leaning toward me, the woman had gotten out and was starting inside. So it was just between us. He said very softly, you know, that was the smoothest ride I've ever had, in a taxi or not in a taxi, in this city. That was really something. And I smiled at him because we both understood. It was good to be appreciated from time to time. He knew, and I knew. I thanked him for saying that. I said, not many people will comment or even notice. We said good night. They went into their building, and I drove on my way, looking for my next customer.